Sally Field just shattered everything you thought you knew about Forrest Gump. For 30 years, she carried a secret so devastating that it would change how you see one of Hollywood's most beloved films forever. While millions celebrated her as the perfect mother figure, Field was quietly enduring something that would break most people. The role everyone thought was a career triumph, it was actually a career death sentence, and she knew it from the very first day on set. But here's what's really shocking. It wasn't just about one casting decision. What happened to Sally Field exposes a dark reality that every woman in Hollywood faces the moment they're no longer considered young enough. And when you discover what really went down behind those heartwarming scenes, you'll never watch Mrs. Gump the same way again. The truth Field finally revealed isn't just unfair, it's cruel. And the most twisted part? Everyone in the industry just accepted it as completely normal. But wait until you hear about the confrontation that happened on set, the painful realization that hit her during filming, and the industry secret that she's now exposing after 3 decades of silence. The year was 1994, and Forrest Gump was about to become the cultural phenomenon that would define a generation. Tom Hanks was delivering the performance of his lifetime. The special effects were groundbreaking, and audiences were falling in love with a story about kindness, perseverance, and the American dream. But for one of its stars, this massive success came with a price that nobody saw coming. What makes this story even more shocking is that Sally Field almost walked away from the project entirely. There were moments during early script discussions when she seriously considered declining the role, not because of the script quality, but because of what accepting it would mean for her future. She could see the writing on the wall, and it terrified her. But Hollywood has ways of making offers that feel impossible to refuse. The film had Oscar potential written all over it. Robert Zemeckis was at the height of his directorial powers, fresh off Back to the Future success, and Tom Hanks was already being whispered about as a potential Best Actor winner. For any actor, being part of a project with that kind of pedigree is incredibly tempting, even when your gut tells you something isn't right. Sally Field walked onto that set as Hollywood royalty. 2-time Academy Award winner, the woman who had conquered television with Gidget and The Flying Nun, then proved her dramatic chops in Norma Rae and Places in the Heart. She was respected, accomplished, and at the peak of her craft. So when the Forrest Gump script landed on her desk, she should have been excited about joining what would become one of cinema's greatest films. Instead, she felt something that would haunt her for the next 30 years. The script was quirky, unlike anything she'd worked on before. The premise seemed risky, and nobody really knew if audiences would connect with this unusual story about a man with an intellectual disability who somehow finds himself at the center of major historical events. Field has admitted that the project felt uncertain from the beginning, like opening a box of chocolates without knowing what flavor you'd get. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Field wasn't just uncertain about the film's commercial prospects. She was grappling with something far more personal, something that cut to the core of her identity as both an actress and a woman. The role she was being offered would force her to confront a brutal reality about Hollywood that she wasn't ready to face. And that reality would change everything about how she saw her career, her worth, and her place in an industry she'd given her life to. The casting decision that seemed so natural to everyone else felt like a knife to the heart for Field. She was being asked to play the mother of Tom Hanks, a man who was actually 10 years younger than her. Think about that for a moment. In what world does it make sense for someone to play the parent of a person who could realistically be their younger sibling? But this wasn't just about age. This was about what that casting choice represented. It was Hollywood's way of telling Field, without saying it directly, that her days as a romantic lead were over. At 47 years old, she was being quietly shuffled into the mother category, while male actors her age continued landing leading man roles opposite women half their age. The most devastating part? She needed the job. She wanted to be part of something special, so she smiled, said yes, and began preparing for a role that would simultaneously become one of her most beloved performances and one of her most painful professional experiences. What Sally Field experienced on Forrest Gump wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic pattern in Hollywood that destroys women's careers the moment they're no longer considered sexually desirable by industry standards. And the brutal truth is, that moment comes much sooner than you think. Field has spoken candidly about the moment she realized her romantic leading lady days were numbered. It wasn't a gradual realization or a gentle transition. It was like hitting a wall at full speed. One day she was being offered complex, multidimensional roles as love interests and protagonists. The next day, she was being offered mother roles almost exclusively. The mathematics of Hollywood ageism are stark and unforgiving. Women hit 40 and suddenly find themselves competing for a shrinking pool of maternal characters, wise mentors, and supporting roles. Meanwhile, their male counterparts continue getting love stories, action films, and leading man parts well into their 60s and 70s. Field found herself caught in this machine, watching as younger actresses took the roles she once would have been offered, while she was expected to be grateful for whatever maternal figure came her way. The industry had decided her value proposition had changed, and there was nothing she could do about it. But here's what made the Forrest Gump situation even more painful. This wasn't just any mother role. This was Mrs. Gump, a character who would deliver some of the most quotable lines in cinema history, who would be the emotional anchor of a film that would touch millions of hearts. It was a role that should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like a consolation prize. The casting process itself revealed just how normalized this age discrimination had become in Hollywood. When executives and casting directors discussed pairing Field with Hanks, nobody questioned the logic. Nobody asked whether it made sense for someone younger to play someone older's mother. The decision was made with the casual indifference that comes from a system so broken that its absurdities seem natural. Field has revealed that she wasn't the only actress considered for the role who faced this same cruel mathematics. Other talented women in their 40s and 50s were also being evaluated based on how convincingly maternal they could appear, not on their acting range or star power. The entire casting process was designed around the assumption that women of a certain age existed primarily to support male stories, not to carry their own narratives. Field has described the emotional complexity of playing Mrs. Gump while grappling with her own identity crisis. She was supposed to embody maternal wisdom and unconditional love while privately mourning the death of her romantic leading lady persona. She had to project warmth and contentment while dealing with the cold reality that Hollywood had aged her out of an entire category of roles. The irony was crushing. She was creating one of cinema's most nurturing mother figures while feeling professionally diminished and personally invisible. Every scene she filmed was a reminder that the industry saw her as valuable only in relation to other people's stories, not as the center of her own narrative. And the most twisted part? She had to be grateful for it. She had to smile in interviews, praise the script, and act like this casting decision made perfect sense. Because in Hollywood's warped logic, it did make sense. Women become mothers. Men become legends. But Field's story was just beginning. The real pain was still to come. The Forrest Gump production was grueling in ways that went far beyond the typical challenges of filmmaking. Long shooting schedules, complex scenes, and the pressure of working on what everyone hoped would be a significant film created an atmosphere of intense focus and high stakes. But for Sally Field, there was an additional layer of emotional complexity that no one else on set could fully understand. Director Robert Zemeckis was known for his meticulous filmmaking style, and his vision for Forrest Gump was specific and uncompromising. Field found herself in frequent discussions with Zemeckis about her character interpretation, and these conversations weren't always smooth. She has revealed that there were moments when the director's vision and her understanding of Mrs. Gump didn't align, creating tension that sometimes made the set feel uncomfortable. But Zemeckis pushed her performance in directions she hadn't expected, even when it was difficult. This creative friction, while challenging, ultimately contributed to the depth and authenticity of her portrayal. Field has acknowledged that some of her best work came from these moments of artistic disagreement, even though they were emotionally exhausting. The dynamic with Tom Hanks presented its own unique challenges. While their on-screen chemistry was undeniable and beautiful, their acting approaches couldn't have been more different. Hanks operated on instinct, absorbing everything around him like a sponge, and letting his natural charisma guide the performance. Field, meanwhile, needed to work through every detail, to understand every motivation and map out every emotional beat. This contrast in styles led to moments of friction that audiences never saw. Field has described feeling like she was constantly catching up, trying to match Hanks's effortless comfort on set, while dealing with her own internal struggle about what this role meant for her career. The most challenging aspect of the performance was channeling her own experiences as a mother, while simultaneously grappling with being cast as a mother figure in Hollywood. Field drew on her real relationships with her sons to bring authenticity to Mrs. Gump's maternal instincts. But every scene was a reminder that this was now how the industry saw her primary value. She had to find the humanity in a character who could easily have been relegated to the background, breathing life into someone who existed mainly to support and nurture the male protagonist. Mrs. Gump needed to be wise without being preachy, loving without being smothering, and strong without overshadowing Forrest's journey. The famous box of chocolates scene required Field to deliver what would become one of the most quoted movie lines of all time. But as she spoke those words about life's unpredictability, she was living that uncertainty in the most painful way possible. She was delivering wisdom about accepting what life gives you, while privately struggling to accept what Hollywood had given her. Field has described moments during filming when she questioned whether the movie would ever come together the way everyone hoped. The tone was so specific, the story so unusual, that there were days when she wondered if they were creating something special, or something that would confuse audiences. But even in those moments of doubt, she never could have predicted the emotional cost of the film's eventual success. When Forrest Gump became a cultural phenomenon, Sally Field found herself in an impossible position. The film she'd had mixed feelings about had become one of the most beloved movies in cinema history. Mrs. Gump's wisdom was being quoted everywhere. The performance was being praised by critics and audiences alike, and Field was being celebrated for creating such a memorable maternal figure. She should have been thrilled. Instead, she was trapped in a complicated emotional prison of her own making. Field has revealed that the success of Forrest Gump created a strange form of cognitive dissonance. She was proud of the work she'd done and grateful for the film's impact, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her participation had somehow validated Hollywood's decision to age her out of leading roles. Every piece of praise for Mrs. Gump felt like confirmation that she was now seen primarily as a mother figure, not as a complex actress capable of carrying her own stories. The award season that followed was particularly difficult. Field watched as Tom Hanks won the Academy Award for Best Actor, deservedly so, while she wasn't even nominated for her supporting performance. The message was clear. His transformation into Forrest was seen as remarkable acting, while her portrayal of Mrs. Gump was seen as natural, almost expected. For 3 decades, Field kept these feelings largely to herself. She gave interviews praising the film, participated in retrospective documentaries, and maintained the public narrative that Forrest Gump had been an entirely positive experience. But privately, she was processing what the role had cost her in terms of her career trajectory and her sense of professional identity. The silence wasn't just about protecting the film's legacy or avoiding controversy. Field has admitted that she needed time to understand her own feelings about the experience. The emotions were complex and contradictory, and it took years for her to develop the perspective necessary to articulate what had really happened. During those 30 years, Field continued working, but the roles offered to her increasingly fit into the maternal, wise woman category that Forrest Gump had helped establish. She found herself typecast in ways that felt limiting, even as she continued to deliver powerful performances. The breakthrough came when Field began working on her memoir and started speaking more openly about the realities of being a woman in Hollywood. As she examined her career with the benefit of hindsight, the Forrest Gump experience began to crystallize as a turning point that represented something much larger than just one casting decision. But even as she prepared to break her silence, Field couldn't have anticipated how her revelation would reframe one of America's most cherished films. When Sally Field finally decided to speak openly about her Forrest Gump experience, she wasn't just sharing a behind-the-scenes anecdote. She was pulling back the curtain on a systemic problem that affects every woman in Hollywood, exposing the cruel mathematics of an industry that discards female talent with ruthless efficiency. Field has described the casting decision as emotionally complicated, acknowledging that while she was grateful for the opportunity to be part of such a significant film, The role represented everything wrong with how Hollywood treats aging women. Being cast as the mother of someone 10 years younger wasn't just odd, it was symbolic of an industry that ages women out of relevance while their male counterparts continue thriving. The revelation forced audiences to reconsider their assumptions about the film. Mrs. Gump's wisdom and strength weren't just character traits. They were the product of an actress channeling her own pain and frustration into a performance that resonated with millions. Field was drawing on her real experience of being pushed aside by an industry she'd served faithfully for decades. But Field's confession goes beyond just personal grievance. She's used her platform to highlight how this pattern affects countless women who don't have her visibility or influence. For every Sally Field who gets offered the mother role, there are dozens of actresses who simply disappear from the industry altogether when they're no longer considered commercially viable in traditional romantic roles. The timing of Field's revelation is significant. As Hollywood grapples with broader conversations about representation, equality, and systemic bias, her story provides a specific example of how these issues play out in real careers and real lives. It's not an abstract problem. It's something that destroyed opportunities and dreams for one of America's most talented actresses. Field has connected her Forrest Gump experience to her later activism work, including her involvement in climate protests and LGBTQ advocacy. She's described how learning to speak up about her own professional experience gave her the courage to speak up about larger social issues. The woman who was once expected to stay silent about industry mistreatment became someone willing to get arrested for her convictions. The response to Field's revelation has been mixed, but largely supportive. Many people have expressed shock at learning about the age difference between Field and Hanks, with some admitting they never questioned the casting at the time. Others have used her story as a starting point for broader conversations about ageism in entertainment and beyond. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Field's confession is how it recontextualizes Mrs. Gump's most famous wisdom. When she tells Forrest that life is like a box of chocolates, that you never know what you're going to get, those words take on new meaning when you understand the personal cost Field paid to deliver them. Field has transformed her pain into power, using her experience to advocate for systemic change while refusing to let the industry's treatment of her define her worth. She's continued working, choosing projects that challenge ageist assumptions and showcase the complexity that older women can bring to storytelling. Her legacy isn't just about the memorable characters she's portrayed. It's about her courage to tell uncomfortable truths that force us to examine our own assumptions and biases. By breaking 30 years of silence, Sally Field didn't just change how we see Forrest Gump. She changed how we see the entire entertainment industry. And that might be the most important performance of her career. In the end, Sally Field's confession about Forrest Gump reveals something profound about resilience, truth-telling, and the price of speaking up. Her willingness to share this story, even after 3 decades, reminds us that behind every beloved performance is a human being with their own struggles, dreams, and disappointments. The next time you watch Mrs. Gump deliver her wisdom to Forrest, you'll know you're watching more than just great acting. You're watching a woman channeling her own pain into art, transforming personal heartbreak into universal truth. And that knowledge doesn't diminish the magic of the performance. It makes it even more remarkable.